This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.
The challenge now is pretty significant. 30 minutes, 100 years, multidisciplinary. It's a tough one. And the reason we do that is because Yesha asked me to lead the study about the history of venture, with the idea, that in order to know where you go, you better know where you came from. As if it's going to help. But anyway, it makes kind of sense, especially those of us used to regressions. How am I going to do that? How am I going to talk? So will I tell you the biggest innovations only? This is where you came from? Am I the expert here to start talking about particular molecules that were discovered? No. So what I decided to do is to take a little bit more holistic view on that and to try to have really a very preliminary look which will lead to discussions. And I will focus a lot about the limitations, but there is a lesson to the limitations that I will try to portray. So essentially, it's also related to the event we had last night with the Dan David that talks a lot about memory and history as boundaryless, So we did bound it by 100 years. Unfortunately, the other dimension, the breadth, is infinite. So still, infinite times finite is infinite. And again, it's ongoing project. It's first report. It will be dynamic. It will be for quite some time. Feel free and keep this limitation in mind as to my study. Now, of course, this is together with Ann Iveson, who is here, and I will refer to her from time to time when it comes, pretty tough. So this is the 100 years. We decided to be quite simplistic, 1914 to 2014. There was a hidden message there too. I mean, MBA was set just a year before that, so we don't need to talk about it. The first thing is motivation. I spoke about. It is going to be about inventions and discoveries. It is going to be about people and companies. It's going to be all together according to a certain criteria that I will show. Uniquely though, it's not only influences, it's not only results, it's not only outcomes, it is also drivers. And in that sense, I think this study is slightly or quite different from what we have seen in the literature. It is not to replicate what is done by others. Just in terms of summary, sum up here, you can see the decades, if you wish, strange decades, but by 10 years each. And you do see here the certain drivers and influences, and we just try to count them. Sometimes, by the way, these what we call events are not one event. They could be quite a long event or a sequence of related things that all happen within similar scope, and usually we try also to do with similar time frame. But that's a count, and about the biases and subjectivity I will cover in a second. But you do see here some of the the drivers like politics and taxation and financial markets and the like, and you do see by outcomes. We try to be as honest as possible, and it's not possible with regard to the time frame and with regard to covering all the different areas. Country-wise, you can see here the count more or less. Obviously, a UK researcher in the US, what you do about the joint works, lumping together certain things. But generally speaking, this is sort of the count, which tells you a little bit about, I don't know if this is bias or not, but obviously we are Western-centric, It is the US, it is the UK, it is the rest of the world comes very low here. And again, we are looking to find, and we included Temasek setting up in Singapore one of the new sort of venture schemes, so to speak. For all our friends here from China and others, please help us if you can come up with more stuff here to cover, especially the Far East that we must have compromised. There is a huge bias. We do know that. We do know that stuff that was written in, for instance, sociology in German was not well quoted because it was not in English. So there are these biases all around sciences, and we are not free of that. Okay? But we do think that a lot of that was done in the US and second the UK, and some of the implications are these platforms that were created by governments and corporations, so that's not a coincidence and not necessarily a bias. We are agnostic, by the way, regarding the type of organization. It need not be startups. By all means, as Yesha said, you know, the big corporations play a huge role in generating innovations, inventions, and other major achievements. Okay, there is no doubt about it. Just a little bit about the biases that I wish to discuss. The criteria, I will not spend much time. We tried to have events that are significant on their own right, disruptive, as well as enabler enabler is the best word, or platform to subsequent innovations and contributions. And last but not least, it's not only the invention, but it is also the commercializations of that, okay? So for instance, the first one, you know, the T model car was not invented then, but it was the mass production of the car that make it commercialize and change the world in many massive direction beyond automotive, whether this is tourism, hotels, road, and tremendous popularization and commercialization, very much equivalent to what happened 100 years earlier with the railway. Okay, so that's not necessarily the invention itself, and we try to strike a balance somewhat there. The biases, let's start with the time distance. It is definitely the case that what we close to us now, we see in a better resolution. Okay, there is definitely more resolution to the present. For us, mainframe, microcomputers, PC, laptops, phones, they're all extremely different. Each of these is a huge event. Probably in 50 years from now, that will all be lumped into one event. Okay? There is no doubt about it. For us, SAP and Oracle, yeah, they are kind of like the same. Who knows what will happen in 50 years from now? Maybe they will not be there at all. And of course, so that's one bias to consider. Second is that, frankly, with regard to the events that are close to us now, we are unable to tell. If you talk about the Higgs boson, the Higgs particle, everybody tells us this is very important, okay? I don't quite know why we felt like we had to include it, okay? Maybe time will tell that this is not. I'll give you a totally opposite extreme case, which is Bitcoin. It's another one. It could be a huge new currency, okay, neutral by country, or it could be a Fed. How do I know? But it's being highly considered, and did we include it by the end of it or not? We did not. Okay, but maybe a mistake. So there is this, again, time frame that is missing for us for the current event. Easy reference. Guys, it's the easiest to go to Wikipedia. We should not really stop there, but practically speaking, where you start, okay? And as I said, easy references means in English, means things that are easily available. That's generated bias. Incrementality is a very interesting matter. Lots of the stuff has been incremental. You cannot really pinpoint one. I tried to see if I compromise Israel, and I really looked events related to Israel just because of particular bias. And I looked, for example, at desalination. You know, I thought about this guy, Zarhin, that started this. Wrong. It started with the Roman, okay? He didn't start anything. He didn't deserve to be there. And he's not there. So I went on and on. Maybe the best example on that is Tesla, Nikola Tesla, the guy that, after him, Elon Musk named the car Tesla, or the company. And the guy is the most productive ever. He holds the record. Who heard about Tesla? I will ask you a few times. Not the car, the man. Same. Oh, I see. It was on Google. Okay, the guy has the world record in terms of number of inventions, okay? And it just covered everything, from alternative currency, that apparently Thomas Edison got the credit for that, to the radio, to the neon bulb, you goes on and on and on. I tried to say, and he's not in our table. The Tesla car is, but not him. I said, is that unfair? I checked and checked. Half of it was done before our time, 1914, but the other half was not significant enough. So a lot of work is done incrementally. Left out, Richard Branson, considered by one of the biggest entrepreneurs. He didn't make anything that deserved him to be on this list, etc. One last bias, there is a bias, IT versus the biosciences. We are far more familiar with Silicon Valley. More has been written about that. We know a lot about enterprise software, about the Ciscos of the world than we do, and I would say people in business as a whole, business schools at least, and that's a bias. And when Anne came to me with all this stuff, new materials, the graphene discovery, and the float glass process, I just took her word that she talked to the right people and they deserve to be on the list. Frankly, I could not figure this out. Okay? Right? That's about it. You were told that they are important, right?
Yeah, they are important.
They are important. Okay. She's my Wikipedia. Let's move on. Subjectivity, it goes without saying. Let me just give you one example on subjectivity, how it's left. About a month or so, I noticed CNBC report on, not report, but study, the 10 biggest events in the last 105 years. 105. Okay. 9 out of the 10 fell within our time. I said, wow, the discoveries. That will be interesting. I looked at them. Only 4 of them are within our 147. Can you believe that? More than half of their top 10 did not make our 147. That shows how subjective it is. You probably wonder which one were left out. For instance, the Concorde. I did not include the Concorde. I still don't think it. Even after I saw that list, I don't think it deserved it. They thought. Okay, so it is subjective. It is what we thought. Let's move on. Impact. One of and that's really the fertile land where we want to go after we get the data. We are still in the process of getting the data, but is to focus on what are the observations that we make and which way we go. So one thing which I will emphasize now a lot is the impact of global political forces on innovation, and that will be the core selection of my events. Institutionalization, that's critical. The platforms cannot be made by the startups. And we see that all along with a casual look at all of these 100 years of events. It's really the institutionalization that is done by generating this platform, whether by governments or by large corporations or any other way, like the Bell Lab that you will see in a second. That's critical for, and I'm sure for deep innovation in particular. Yet, having said that, I will give an example about the power of individuals. We should not ignore the individual. It's not just the organization. And multidisciplinary, that's an interesting one. My hunch that we didn't have a lot of it in the early days, which is probably wrong, but yet to be seen. And again, you can tell me more. We see more and more of these in the later period of our events. And so these are kind of preliminary or intermediate outcomes and insights. Now, these are 10 random, not the most important one, totally random 10 that if I had 2 hours, I would have spoken about all of them because they each represent something else. So, for instance, I will focus only on 3 that relate to political and social impacts, and the rest I will just skip in the interest of time. For instance, the penicillin. Anne, do you want to say why we included the penicillin?
Well, I think penicillin shows quite a lot of things that Ellie has talked about. One is, namely, when it started, everybody knows about Alexander Fleming in 1928. But it took a good few years more before the commercialization. It was 2 others, Howard Florey, an Australian, and another guy called Ernst Chain, actually a German person who emigrated to the UK as a result of the in history as a result of the Third Reich. So it demonstrates one of the points that Eddie's going to make about the emigration out of many of those countries to the UK and the US. And then also the forgotten person, because in terms of the commercialization, there was another person who was very important in getting that done. And only 3 people can get a Nobel Prize. And it was Fleming, Florey, and Chain that got the Nobel Prize in 1945. Another guy, Norman Heatley, was forgotten. And he went and worked with Pfizer, funnily enough, the collaboration of the big industrial, to get it all done. And it was the war, the Second World War, and with the US involvement, that really needed penicillin to get going. So I think it shows a lot of the aspects that we're trying to show from the inside out: collaboration, commercialization, and the need for political pushes and forces to get things done.
And there's no doubt that penicillin deserves its merit on its own right. Fighting, antibiotics, basically, providing antibiotics, that's a no-brainer. But apparently it's also a platform now to many other discoveries in the area of antibiotics. Okay, I will just skip that and go straight in the little time that we got into 4 examples in more detail. This is the least of these, but nevertheless, Bell Labs. I mean, for me, this is a no-brainer. There might be guys here who don't really know much about Bell Labs. Bell Labs was a very interesting organization. It has been set by AT&T, or at that time it was called Bell, together with Western Electric, and it was basically very much academic center, I would say. And definitely it was multidisciplinary. And a lot of the home runs that were discovered came from there. Innovations like the radio, astronomy, laser, transistor. Again, I'm not saying that all of them were invented just there, but certainly huge push and advancements were done there. Information theory, Unix operating, etc. So, and all the way to anti-craft missiles and the Apollo program. And in a strange way, the money arrived because they were a monopoly. They had to show goodwill. They were in New Jersey, and they really made tremendous value added to innovation coming from a very large platform. In fact, there are 7 Nobel Prize winners that are coming from work that was completed there. So that's a very important example that people don't realize anymore regarding one of the earlier, more successful platforms. Moving next, this is an example of a political power that had far-reaching consequences. Okay, this is a quotation that I found rather recently, and that's a pretty shocking quotation. And essentially, there were 50 years of hegemony, of really supremacy of science in Germany, that all was washed deliberately in one go in 1933 and 34 with the rise of the Third Reich. What that means is that all of a sudden there was a flood of primarily Jewish, but not only, scientists to the West. And the UK government has a plan for that, to absorb them, and the Rockefeller Foundation put a plan to absorb them in the US. And the names are amazing, and even the names that we are not, I'm not familiar with, are amazing names. Like, I'm not talking about Einstein, by the way, not only in science, others like, or not only, Sigmund Freud, okay? He's there on that list as well, even though he's not in our innovations. But people like Niels Bohr, okay? People like Edward Teller, Leo Szilard, who co-signed with Albert Einstein the letter to who was it? To Franklin? No, to Roosevelt. To Roosevelt. You know, these are all there included, and the outcome is that I would say that if this was probably the single factor to the outcome of the war, because these guys were behind the Enigma in the UK, behind the new computers, the whole area of computers, and of course the atomic bomb. In terms of us, that's generated tremendous platforms. Los Alamos was created at the time. And these guys later on filtered into, got jobs at the top universities, really the most eminent universities. You know, Stanford and especially MIT. The strengths of MIT come from this. In fact, another referral to last night, one of the winners of the Dan David, Marvin Minsky, he gave credit to his professors who came and established the departments at MIT of artificial intelligence from that group. So here, and as a whole, wars, and for instance, the Cold War, also had tremendous implications on generating platforms, because what happens at times of wars is that the government finds all the means and the priority to put people together that otherwise don't see each other except for the cafeteria, okay? So all of a sudden, there is a tremendous amount of resources coming from left, center, and right together, put there in very intensive terms for years, and for months and for years, until they generate unbelievable powerful stuff, like the computers. This collaboration did not come naturally unless people are really convinced this is essential. Moving on. Who heard the name Fred Terman before? Anybody? A few. This is the really unsung hero. This is the single guy behind Silicon Valley. There are very few events where you can pinpoint one guy. Without him, there would not have been the Silicon Valley. Okay? Many people give the credit to William Shockley. If anything, God help me, he is counter to what the value is supposed to mean. He was a very, very difficult person, genius of course, but the Shockley laboratories were run in a crazy way, very suspicious, you know, stories over and over. It led to the defection of the treacherous 8. I'm sure many heard about that. Many view that as the big things. You know, you got people like Gordon Moore behind the Moore law, Moore principle, as well as Intel. You got Kleiner there as well, from Kleiner Perkins, of course, Eugene Kleiner, and 6 more. But they were part of it. But the big driver was Fred Terman, who was the Dean of Engineering at Stanford. He realized the need to develop an area next to the school, which is the Silicon Valley. His students are the people who founded Hewlett & Packard for HP. And so he was helping them to set it up and send them out there. He brought the corporations there. Varian was one of the first, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, Lockheed. As you can see, these are not startups. These are large corporations, and he established the valley. Later on, he was the guy who reached out to the real estate people to open shopping malls because he understood that people need to live there. There was basically nothing there, orchards, okay? And he established this community. So people will actually be able, maybe a little bit like the Weizmann Institute, where people live, where they work, and that's how he established. Very modest guy, and I think really is unsung hero. Moving on, the last one. The last is, I don't know how I do on time, okay? The last one is the hippie movement. We talked about Fairchild before. People did hear about Fairchild, right? How many heard about Fairchild, by the way? Yeah, this table here is strong. Well, I'm here for the flower children, not the Fairchild, but the flower children, Fairchild. And you ask me why. Well, is that a coincidence that in the late 60s, the Silicon Valley, the startup world started the way we know it? Okay, how much time? 3. Okay, good. It started there at the same time that we had all the riots with the Vietnam War, all the free spirit, whatever it means, free love, LSD, you know, all the extremes, not only in San Francisco, but definitely San Francisco was the capital. I would say even more extreme, things like the Zen movements. All of a sudden people started to develop Zen principles, which is, which by the way means a lot. It means tolerance to the immigrants. The immigrants in America need not, for the first time, just be absorbed into the society and become washed like everybody else. Whoa, they bring something else. We can adopt perhaps what they bring. Well, that also meant that it's okay to be a little bit eccentric and not to work for the large corporation, for Kodak or Eastman Kodak, and to have your own startup. And this spirit of entrepreneurship, no, it's no coincidence that it started with people who decided to go to the university and get a PhD rather than be drafted to the war in Vietnam. It's a particular type of people, okay? So these two phenomena, I don't think ever somebody put them together, and I'm very proud to announce about it here now. They are, in my view, very important. So what I focused on was the Bell Lab organization, the individual, Fer Thurman, and this movement. They are not necessarily the biggest events, but certainly they are showing that there is much more here for us to contribute in terms of understanding systems and to make huge impact on innovation. I think I'm done. I have 2 more minutes left, which I will. Oh, yeah, I have two quiz to you. My God. Question number 1. The first computers. Any guess? ENIAC. Close. You get partial credit. Huh? No. It is the first computers were actually female. These were the soldiers, primarily female soldiers, who were working on the ENIAC at the University of Pennsylvania during the war. In fact, it was all meant to be for ballistic and artillery computations. It's a huge, gigantic, 170 square meter computer at the time that consumed 150 kilowatt of energy when it was lit. And in fact, the rumors were that the lights in Philadelphia dimmed when they lit up the computer, okay? That was this huge one. And it was the ENIAC, and it was the full-fledged first one. Even though this is another story, we can go on tangents forever, but the point is that the people who operated there, like to use the word, whatever, engineer, etc., computers, to compute. They were the people, computers. And they happened to be primarily female, very bright mathematicians and others taken from universities, simply because it was not on the battlefront in that sense, okay? That's why they were primarily female. There was a reunion of some of them, which I read about it. It was fascinating. Again, women that people don't realize were one of the pioneers. The second question on my list is, because there is disproportionate amount of Israelis here, I thought I will have one for you guys, an easy one. There is a single inventor on my list, a single, okay? I will not ask you to guess because it's not fair. And I will just give you hints. It's a he, so I'll use he. It's not in IT and it's not in bioscience. Automotive? It's not automotive. Okay? I tell you something else. Not only that you don't know, I will even tell you his name and you will not know. That's something, huh? Who heard here before the name Simcha Blas? Nobody. In fact, he was working for the government. Irrigation, deep irrigation, absolutely. He was working for Mekorot. Very good.
What group number are you in? Good. Point.
It is pretty complicated how you make the holes large enough and very fast throughput of water through, and the reason it has to be big enough so that they will not be, with particles being clogged, and yet make it effectively. So there is the engineering behind it. This is the guy also who is behind, I'll say it in Hebrew, it's easier, the Mobil Artzi. So he was also a manager in some sense. Very modest guy, and basically he made our list. Now, the reason he made the list, you can ask, why is drip irrigation important? It's not the Netafim, the company. It is important because this is the way, in a commercial, sensible way, to take huge areas in Africa or wherever else, to make them arable land. Okay? Relatively, when water is scarce, how can you take thousands and thousands of acres and convert them into arable land? It's only drip irrigation. Done.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
This program was brought to you by Koller Institute of Venture at Tel Aviv University.